You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. It's Spanners here on a sunny Thursday afternoon, and we just dropped into the shed to answer some listener questions, and then the klaxon of breaking driver news appeared on our news feeds as well. So we are going to still answer some listener questions, but then we have to also look into the driver announcements because Stroll is staying, Gasly is staying, and there's strong hints of signs to Alpine. I'm joined by Matt Two Rumpets. Hello, Matt.
Hey there, Spanners.
And we're also joined by Chris Stevens as well. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Spanners.
Hi, that was a really friendly hello. That must mean you're pleased to see me and talk to me.
I am pleased, especially because we were supposed to do this yesterday and it was my travel woes that denied us.
But this is the problem with the recording schedule, that if we have recorded that yesterday, we would then be sitting here going, we haven't had the confirmation of Stroll and Gasly, which has dropped on our plates this morning. So I think, where should we start? Let's start with Gasly, because that's the most surprising of the two, with Ocon pretty much, now has been confirmed to be leaving, but we don't know exactly where Ocon's going. I thought we'd see Gasly looking at the exit door as well. And you guys might disagree with this, but I still think of Gasly as a driver who's looking for that path to the top. So he's still looking for the opportunity to go and fight and go and challenge for titles. He hasn't reached that kind of, journeyman status of Hülkenberg or where Ricciardo found himself. So I'm surprised that he didn't jinx sideways. He clearly thinks that Alpine have something to offer going that way, or they've convinced him of that. Otherwise, I don't think he'd have stayed there.
Well, I think, first of all, he won't be at Alpine. He'll be at whatever Team Endstone is calling itself next year and in 2026. And remember that we have a very strong indication that it will not be a Renault-powered team in 2026 as well. So that kind of does knock on the head the idea that they're suddenly going to burst onto the scene in 2026 with a fabulous car that's going to dominate the championship.
It does a little bit.
So I agree with you. He's trying to find that path, but maybe Alpine was the only option for him.
It could be that. I just want to say, obviously, we were talking to Joe, and it's widely reported now that Alpine were thinking of making the decision of becoming a customer team engine-wise and not making their own engine. Now, I never like to break anything, so don't treat this as breaking news. It's not a scoop, but someone we know who is an equally bad source as you and me spoke to somebody else who is not a source either, but who spoke to someone who is. So this is what, fourth hand now? And so what we've heard is that the decision has been made that Alpine is not going to be Renault-powered in 26.
I mean, I don't know what you're worried about. Alpine is already broken.
Oh, right. So, no, I'm not breaking Alpine. So, there's clearly something odd going on there, but it doesn't feel like it's maybe Renault pulling the strings fully anymore over there.
No, here's what's going on. This is sheer panic on the part of DeMeo, who demanded in a very strident CEO fashion things be fixed immediately, was promised such by the people currently in charge. And then he rapidly discovered that instead of making things better, they made things far, far, far worse. And on top of that, the rumors that I've heard, at least, is that they have once again massively underinvested in their 2026 project. And it is, in fact, far behind and not necessarily going. 2014 levels of customer satisfaction, even though they're the only team. And so some pretty rapid body parts covering decisions have been made to try and keep them vaguely competitive going into the next regulation set.
Renault underinvesting in their Formula One team? Stop it. No, they wouldn't do a thing like that.
Yeah, so what have they offered Gasly? So this is what I'm thinking, is that Gasly doesn't strike me as a driver who is just going to take that shiny offer because we could say, well, what other options are there? We could explore that. But I just think fundamentally, to convince Gasly to be at your team, you have to say, not only are we going forward, but you will have an opportunity to show you are a championship winning contender for the future. I don't think you can offer Gasly 20 million and he goes, oh, money, brilliant. Do you know what I mean? Or if you said to him, Verstappen's coming here, you'll be his number 2. He's not going to stay there.
Well, I mean, earlier on, before the whole Ocon thing and when all the speculation was in full drive, the thing that you tended to notice was that both he and Ocon were always mentioned as, well, Ocon's looking here, but Gasly's looking here too. And so it just occurs to me that what Alpine have to offer him is a chance to still be in Formula One. And he's not in any kind of a position to go demanding, to go knocking on team doors and say, look at how brilliant I am. I smashed all the people I've ever raced against. I've won races. I'm clearly as good as, 7-time world champions. So I should drive for Mercedes. I should drive for Red Bull. Oh, well, he already did drive for Red Bull. So forget that. But you get my point. He doesn't have the resume to be that demanding.
I agree, Matt. I literally think it's a place in Formula One that they've offered him, because where else is he going to go? It seems like Audi are committed to a different selection of drivers. Outside of that, Haas is looking pretty set with drivers elsewhere, especially if we think Ollie Behrman's coming into that team.
Yes.
As well. Williams, okay, maybe, but that would at the best be a sideways step, and at least he has the comfort of familiarity with a team like Alpine. So and there's no place in the higher seats, that is for sure. We know that much. Even if Red Bull are keeping people like Perez and Aston Martin are keeping people like Stroll.
Yeah, well, obviously Stroll's the next one there. So I know that we give the Enstone outfit a bit of a hard time, and especially this season where they seem to have gone backwards down the grid until very recently. But really their natural position is outside that top 4. You used to say outside that top 3. McLaren has now firmly, I don't think this is a flash in the pan, they firmly joined that top group. So you can comfortably say really the natural position for a team of that budget, making reasonable decisions, being able to bring good people in at some point. I'm sure there's good people there now, but they've lost a lot of people. You would say naturally that's a top 5 team. So Gasly's signature now guarantees him, point scoring opportunities going forward.
But there should be a top 6, shouldn't there? Really, you should have the Red Bull, the Mercedes, the Ferrari, the McLaren, the Aston Martin, and the Alpine right in there as well. It is a factory team. The issue is it's underfunded, right? And I think if it was funded properly, it would be joining the big wigs and fighting for podiums on a regular basis, perhaps.
I will fight you on that. If they weren't constantly firing their top management and causing huge personnel issues,
well, that's also true.
They would have been they might have been better off just keeping last year's car. It's the decision making at the team is not necessarily filling me with I don't know, awe. Let's just say that there are other teams, and in fact, I got curious, so I looked up because people have been saying, "Oh, look at us! Look at Alpine now. They're better than Aston. They're better than RB. Points wise, Aston is on 58 points. Alpine is on 8. I mean, you'll convince me that they're a better team when they score a few more points than they have right now.
One race does not a season make.
No, that's true. Okay, so it's not the most surprising news in the world, but as someone sort of, broadly, I would say I'm broadly a Gasly fan. I want to see him do well and push on. Yeah. I think you're correct that there's not the options to move to. If he'd have gone earlier, would Williams have been interested in him? Might have been able to go for another team. I really do believe, and people are going to argue with me, so email Matt at missedapex.net, that Williams are looking for money from drivers who come in. I think they are looking for backing.
Well, what's interesting about that, though, Spanners, is supposedly the lineup for next year will be Albon, Sainz.
Yeah.
and they are not.
Oh, this is where we get in a fight. I think Albon brings money to Williams.
He does. Of course he does.
All right. Oh, okay, good.
Also...
I thought you were going to argue that with me. Well, he's also talented, but he does bring in money.
But he's not we're hiring this guy for his money driver.
I haven't claimed that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm agreeing with you 100% on this. But Sainz is in a similar ballpark as well.
Yeah, so Sainz isn't going to turn up with 12 million in family money, but he could attract personal sponsors. I'm sure he could bring money to Williams.
Yeah, he does. Absolutely, he does. But it's not like, they're not in a situation where we have a Latifi or a Sargent or a Mazepin on the grid, or a Joe, for example. So I don't think it's not necessarily financially driven, because I think they're also at a point where we need two good drivers to push this team forward. And when you hear about what James Vowles has to say about the future of that team, and he wants to move it forward, I think that's probably part of the next step.
And the next step in this show would be, well, who's going to be lining up alongside Gasly then? Because the story broke. Sorry, stuttering on my words here because I can't remember the name of the site, but there's one of these rumor sites, and I've completely forgotten who it is. And they're a lot like fortune tellers in that they will praise their hits and ignore the misses. But they called the Gasly re-signing last week, and they're now saying Sainz is likely to join Alpine. I mean, that's not impossible, but Matt is shaking his head.
You would not, if you were Sainz, join a team that looks like Alpine right now. It is pure chaos over there.
Counter.
Just utter chaos. Okay, counter.
If you want to start the highest possible up the grid at the start of 2025, you would go to Alpine over Audi or Williams.
But we're not talking about 2025, are we, Spanners? Everybody is signing to be in the right team for 2026 when the new regulations come in my opinion anyway. And I think to join Alpine would be an utter failing of his contract negotiation period. Like, ever since the news came out that he'd be leaving Ferrari, he has been talking to every team on the grid about a seat. And to end up at Alpine that is worst case scenario, because the other options were, become part of the Audi Works team for 2026 and help build that team up, which seemed like the most likely option 3 months ago. Now Alpine, though, that is worst case scenario.
I agree. If you look at the points right now, Williams has exactly one less point than Alpine. Williams has a much higher ceiling. They're fully funded by Dorilton and Dorilton's partners. Don't forget, Dorilton is a private equity, a hedge fund. They have a lot of other companies they own that they can bring to the business and fund. So if you're looking at who has the most potential right now, I think Williams is the answer, with Audi possibly being there, but the chaos of a new team is always a chaos of a new team. So there you go.
Well, what's most impressive about that is Williams only has one driver. So
I think looking at the points as any indicator of what is going to be the best long-term future is possibly going to lead you astray, because Alpine's low point scoring start to the season will betray their average, their mean position in the F1 constructors table over the last 10 years. And when it comes to predicting things for the future, I'm a big believer in, a reversion to the mean. So if you see a team spike, like we saw Alpine spike last year, you go, well, where's their average position? Where do they tend to be? And you go, the strongest, most likely thing is they will return to the mean. So when Alpine dropped to the bottom of the grid at the beginning of the season and looked at times like the worst car on the grid, you would have to still bet they're going to revert to the mean. They're going to end up being 4th, 5th, 6th again at some point. It's still where are Sauber now? Where are Williams now? What is their base level? Those are backmarker, bottom of the grid teams. And so you're really gambling on them to really change and get out of that rut and break out of where they've been for years and years, rather than going for an established top-end midfield team.
They're not a top end midfield team anymore. I think if you look back at their history, they've rolled down the hill from 4th to about 7th now. And
in the
way
constructors
behind,
now. So
way behind 6th place. They're not where they were.
You're taking a very small section of history and you're extrapolating that out.
I'm going back to 2016 when they beat Haas for 4th place on the grid, and they have continually, gradually done worse in a very linear fashion. So I understand you're looking at past performance, but if you want the Renault you're talking about, you have to go back to when Renault didn't actually own the team. And they got a Mercedes engine in the car, and they were very careful with how they spent their cash, except for that weird nose that didn't work out. And that was the last time we saw them like going, oh, look, the Grosjean gets a podium. They weren't Renault back then. Now they are, and they have all the same problems that we saw Toyota have, that we saw Honda have, is the interference from the corporate parent. Once Carlos Ghosn was gone, anything they had on the ball, anything they had working for them at the corporate level, letting them go and just be brilliant in the way that you need to let a Formula One team go, disappeared. And it's been just more interference and less money and more problems.
I like that we're all disagreeing on this. So we got some feedback about various points, and people got angry with me for saying that Verstappen, that Red Bull might have had the fastest car last weekend. Quite a few people actually really angry with me, saying that I was trying to diminish Verstappen's performances and I'm on some anti-Verstappen agenda. I will ask those people just to listen to the very start of the show where I said, wow, after all the times we couldn't tell if Max had a great performance, here we can tell he had a great performance and drove a near perfect race, and that's why he won. But all the criticism was based on that one comment that I didn't think Mercedes, we could tell conclusively that McLaren had the fastest car. But all that show, or any criticism we got about any talking points, somebody else made the counter talking point. So that was the most argumentative race review we've ever had. But I like that. I like when all sides are covered. And my brother-in-law said to me, he goes, I love sitting and watching the show. He goes, but by the end of the show, I'm none the wiser because you all say different things. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's the point. So I'm happy. I'm really happy to disagree with you guys here, that I think if you're Carlos Sainz, I hadn't really thought of Alpine as being an open option, but I think actually in the near future, that's the one to go for. Be in the right car for the right time, like being on the right tyre for the right time. Yeah, you don't want to be Leclerc on the slicks as the rain is still falling. As was the case in Canada. So be in the right grid position at the right time. Be Alpine.
I just don't see it. I see less investment. I see more interference. And, again, we disagree about this. That's fine. But, past performance, future performance, not the same thing.
There is always, there's two options for him. He joins a customer team or he joins the new works team. And I think the works team is the one with the biggest potential.
All right. And I think let's go on to the subject then that we might agree on. Lance Stroll gets after all the wondering as to whether they would retain Lance Stroll, they have made the decision to re-sign him.
Yeah, so this is another clear statement here that Aston Martin doesn't care where it finishes in the Constructors' Championship for the next 2 years, at least.
Ooh, I see what you're driving at, but I'll counter that slightly as in they might understand that it might compromise their place in the Constructors' Championship, whether they would openly go, because we've got Lance Stroll, that means we've got no hope of points. Surely they would be hopeful that Stroll will start getting points.
No, of course they won't say that. And they'll say that he committed to every corner he crashed at and every overtake that turned into a collision. Or every hot-headed moment on track where he does something silly. It's undeniable he has cost them positions in the Constructors' Championship since they came on to good form. Supposedly, as well, the rumor mill is that Fernando Alonso signed a multi-year deal with them as well, which is a little surprising, actually, especially when we consider that there's a change in engine partner in 2026 as well, which brings about a lot of uncertainty. So it is what it is, isn't it? We know he's.
You sound very down about it, Chris. You sound very down.
I am because I don't think he's good enough for Formula One.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been arguing online with Sean again. He says Sean's basic thing is, well, you may as well look at the positive side of it and go, well, he got a great sprint result and he's out-qualified Alonso 4 times this year. Why can't we just be positive? And sort of said, well, people are just willing him to fail. And I would say, like, Mike, I understand that sort of, okay, he's in F1, so why be super negative? Why not just, look at the bright side? It's gone on for an awful long time. I just don't want people to pretend that his results have justified remaining in Formula One for 7 seasons or 8 seasons. And he will now potentially be in Formula One for 10 seasons, having only beaten his teammate once. And there is no driver in F1 history who could have a record near to that and stay, in a technically paid position in Formula One. So I think, we know the reality. His dad owns the team. That's why he's there. I think it's just, I don't want to be gaslit by people saying, oh yeah, but what about that one result, that one time?
I think it's a wasted opportunity as well with the hypercar program, like right there as well. It's right around the corner. And I think Lance would do pretty well in that, actually.
I mean, the issue you have with your Stroll argument is that his results are entirely mid. And if we're going to evaluate him as a driver, like, yes, his father owns the team. But if we look at him as a driver, let's say, like Joe, who just simply brings a lot of money to the team, well, I mean, he's racing against Alonso. He's got 17 points to Alonso's 49. Alonso has done much more damage to more qualified teammates. So everything you say about him, it can be answered by he's decent enough for a driver in the Classic. He's got the seat because he's got the money and has enough skill to remain in the team. That doesn't take away from the other arguments that there are more talented people who would benefit from being in a car that fast.
Counter.
But it's hard to just say he doesn't deserve it because by the rules of Formula One, we've seen plenty of other drivers in similar situations stick around.
I've been watching too many debates on TV. Counter. So the last season, in a car that was actually decent and getting podiums, Alonso got 206 points and finished P4 in the championship, compared to Stroll finishing in P10 in the championship on 74 points. Now, that is a massive gap. And if you look weekend in, weekend out, when Aston Martin have a better car, Alonso's further ahead.
And when you think about it, P10 is kind of the absolute bare minimum when you consider we have top 5 teams. And bear in mind, last year as well, we didn't start with 5 top teams. We started with 4 as well.
They had an extraordinary start last year, and all that time when Alonso was cashing in points and podiums, Stroll wasn't doing anything. Even towards the end of that year, as they went down, Stroll stayed more or less the same. It's just that Alonso came down to meet him. So look, when that car's performing, Stroll hasn't been able to cash in. And you say, Matt, that there's people who are also paying to be in Formula One. So, get off his back, they're everywhere. But they have a few seasons at the back of the grid. They don't have a manufacturer car. I know it's a customer team, but you know what I mean? Aston Martin up there, in the top half. It's unprecedented. It definitely isn't the same as Palmer coming in with a bit of backing and trying to make a go of it at Renault.
No, it's not. But again, if Alonso is only outscoring you 3-1, you're doing better than historically most of his teammates. You can laugh, but show me how Joe is doing compared to Valtteri last season, for example, or anything else like that. There's a far wider gulf between Bottas and Joe than there is between Alonso and Stroll.
That's harder to show when neither of them are scoring points in the start.
Well, this season, but go back to last season.
Okay, it's Joe finished with 6 points, Bottas finished with 10. So that might not be the best example either.
Well, there may not be enough points in it for Sauber to really have a fair. But if you look at their maybe relative finishing position, I don't know. but my impression from last season, my vibe from last season is that we saw suddenly, or maybe even this season, we've seen suddenly a much bigger gulf between those two drivers than exists between Alonso and Stroll. And it's weird to sit here and defend Stroll because, again, I would prefer to see
it. No,
I would prefer to see it, but just on the structure of the argument they're making, it has some merit to it that is really annoying to not just fully be able to dismiss.
I don't know. I see, because people will complain at me and I'll say, look, the show had, see, this is balance. Matt created balance. You seem to be sort of advocating for Pro-Am F1, though, is basically what you're advocating for. Well, it's okay because Joe's in that situation with Bottas. It's okay because Sargent's in that situation with Albon.
Oh, I feel sad for Sargent. He literally, I found out the other day that he finally in Spain got the same chassis that Albon's been racing since after like Australia or whenever it is. It's not even any other arguments aside. Like, I don't think it's possible to make a super great comparison there.
No, look, I'm sure that makes a difference, but it's like when your mum says, we've got at-home ice cream, so we can't get ice cream from the vendor. And then have you ever asked, yeah, but what would happen if we didn't have at-home ice cream? If we happen to not have at-home ice cream, would I be getting ice cream van ice cream right now? And the answer would be no. Even if he'd had the same chassis, he wasn't getting anywhere near Alex Albon.
Apples and oranges. That's my only point here.
All right. Let's see. Before we move on to the mailbag, there's one thing. How clued in are you guys with the track limits changes for Austria? They've put a bit of gravel in.
Yeah.
Chris, you tend to be all over this stuff.
I mean, you remember like the last couple of years where it's just been constant track limits, and the qualifying would look nothing like it did when you turned it off, and the race had 50 million 5-second time penalties for track limits violations. Drivers saying, well, we can't see where the track limits are, and the gravel is supposedly going to help with that, and it'll actually be a significantly more of a visual cue if you've gone into the if you've gone off the track. It's a weird solution to have like a bit of gravel, a bit of tarmac, and then a bit of gravel, and then some more tarmac. But hey, look, if it works, it works. And the paint as well is there to kind of help the AI that they're using to help determine where the track limits are. So I guess against that color, it'll be easier to determine whether a car's gone outside of track limits.
So this is kind of an interesting one. Back when that first race happened, Brad and I had a discussion about it. And he basically said, the issue there is the drivers have no direct reference when they're in that portion of the track where all the off tracks occurred. And they weren't at the same time getting feedback from the team and from race control, you are off track there. So they would rack up all these repeat violations, not aware they were on the wrong side of the millimeter accuracy they are, quote unquote, renowned for. And by time it caught up to them, they had 5, 10, 15, 20-second penalties. Last year, they were much better about getting that information to the drivers faster so they could be a bit more careful through there. But fundamentally, the issue is Formula SUV. Once again, you've got these massive tires, you've got these massive cars, you have the drivers buried for safety reasons way down in the cockpit, and they can't visually reference where they are on that exit of the last turn there, which is where the vast majority of these things happen. And we said at the time, they just need to put in a little stretch of, just get an angle grinder out and just grind some grooves in so that they know when they're close that they are close. And I think that's what this gravel is going to do. As for the AI, they've had these cameras, and I think they had the lines maybe in Barcelona to test them. They're putting new cameras in. It's a whole new system that's based on, I think, a large learning model, which is what everybody now calls AI incorrectly. And it's actually going to be, I think, a fairly good use case because it'll sort the obvious things out very quickly for race control. And my understanding is that they'll be reviewed in any event before penalties are assessed.
Okay. I've got 2 points on this. One is, there's the solution that I want, which is this kind of, the PlayStation iRacing solution. You detect the car's off, it goes off. There is already this warning system. So they get black and white flags for track limits. And what's the number? Like if you get 4, you end up getting a penalty.
3, and then 4th is a penalty.
Okay, so the system already exists, exactly like iRacing, where you get a 1x for going off the track. And, you get enough of them and you get a drive-through penalty. The only difference here would be, well, during the race, monitor that with AI. But AI is just doing what I've been calling for ages, which use some technology to find out where one object is in relation to another object. And it's a very, very old technology. We've been having radar since World War II. You can detect where one thing is compared to another thing. That's not difficult. If they want to use it with cameras and AI, yes, so be it. I think you could build a system that can accurately do that and then punish drivers automatically in a race. And the team would see, oh, we're on 3 track limits violations, 1 more, and we're going to get a 5-second penalty, which I think would be incentive enough. And it would mean that you couldn't be just routinely using that to get a run on your opponent, down the back straight. And I think people could get cleverer that you go, right, well, if you get an off track in the final turn to give yourself more of a kick up the back straight and you overtake someone, you got to give that place back because you're going off track to gain an advantage. The other side is, the other solution I've wanted is something bad to be on followed by runoff. So in this case, this is almost exactly what I wanted, which is, my thing was a strip of grass or a strip of artificial grass and then runoff. But this is gravel. So presumably there is a little bit of a ditch or a bit of a lower area where the gravel's been put into, and the gravel will move when the wheel goes in there. So my concern here is there is a flip risk with this gravel trap.
I was thinking this because there must be, like you say, a ditch and some part where if you were going over it, you would hit the bit where it rejoins the sort of surface level. And that would be quite a rough ride, or quite big energy going through the car at that point.
This would be no different to going too far over the curb and dropping off the backside of it. We saw that happen at Barcelona a couple of times, and you can see them skating along that ridge till they come back on. I don't think the FIA has enough experience with gravel traps. This is not like the one that flipped Joe, for example. This is a much smaller X or Y, pick your favorite Cartesian direction gravel trap, mainly to slightly punish, but also make the drivers aware immediately that they've transgressed the limit of the track.
I like your suggestion, Matt, though, because yours isn't punitive; it's indicative. So they kind of get a warning, like the wake up granddad strips on the motorway.
Yeah, that's all that's really needed here. I think the gravel just looks nice, and apparently they finally worked it out with the motorbike guys, a way to turn it out of gravel quickly and easily for the circuit.
All right, let's dip into our mailbag. All right, we've got one here. This is right up your wheelhouse, Chris. So let's start with that. And it's Brett who asks a question. Do Behrman and Antonelli catapulting into F1 signal the end of people aiming to be an F2 champion? Can we just skip F2 now?
Well, those are 2 very different questions. To the first question, no. If you're in F2, you will always try to be champion of the series. Otherwise, you're just not a racing driver anymore. But the problem with F2 and the ability to move into Formula One, we know it's not a meritocracy. It is largely down to if you are affiliated with a Formula One team, which Formula One team you're affiliated, and the timing of your affiliation as well. Because as we know, at the moment, being a Red Bull junior is about as useful as a chocolate teapot because they just don't promote their drivers at the moment. But obviously being a Mercedes junior for Kimi Antonelli and being a Ferrari junior for Ollie Behrman, this is fantastic timing for them. And yes, I know they haven't had a fantastic season, either of them, but the team hasn't had the best start to the season as well. And I think they're very fortunate that their respective teams are taking that into consideration because they know how good their two drivers are. Normally, the Formula One team would take a very relaxed interest in why is my driver not doing so well. It's more, oh, you're underperforming. Oh well, we're not gonna bother with you then. But Ferrari and Mercedes are very heavily invested in Behrman and Antonelli. Mercedes more so in Antonelli than Ferrari is in Behrman, because Antonelli is, the future of the team against Lewis Hamilton.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about both these guys because actually I know relatively little about either of them.
Yeah.
So the first thing is, you're right. Antonelli's the major one because Mercedes seem to be putting all their eggs in their basket. Like they're talking about him like it's so sure that he's going to come in and just be a wildly generational talent. And to me, this is his first season in F2, right?
Yes.
And he's not massively dominating the championship. He's not massively dominating his teammate.
No one is dominating the championship, though. This is the thing.
Yeah, which is
a stellar field this year of drivers.
Sure. So what is it that is making Mercedes so sure that Antonelli is going to be this future superstar?
They put their faith in him well before he got into single-seater racing. Since his karting days, they have been backing Antonelli big time. But once Antonelli did hit the single-seater field, he just absolutely swept everything up around him. 2 F4 titles in 1 year, 2 Formula Regional titles in 1 year. To make the jump up directly from the Formula Regional series, which is sort of sub F3, to go straight into Formula 2 is it cannot. Yeah.
No F3.
Did no F3. So I can't really overstate how massive a jump that is. That very few, because the thing is, he almost had the points he needed for a super license just after doing Formula Regional, which is pretty astonishing when you think about it. And I can't overstate. It's like twice the amount of power. It's so much more downforce. He'd never run on Pirellis before this season. Most of the circuits are brand new to him as well. So that's just a very short list of reasons. Like, why hasn't Antonelli come in and dominated like he has done everything else in his career up until this point? The important thing is to get him in a position where he's going to be good good enough for F1 next year, which frankly he already is. And the only reason he's in F2 is because the super license points system exists.
Okay, you've educated me there. Thank you for that insight. I now think it's even madder that they're so invested in him and that they're putting. It just seems like such a huge gamble. It's unreal, Matt.
Well, I think Chris hit the nail on the head, perhaps inadvertently, when he said, oh, well, it's not really surprising he's doing this because he's doubled the power. He's never run on these tires before. Well, what do you think happens when you go to Formula One? You double that power again. Your tires are even more of an issue. And we've seen extremely well prepared, extremely massive reputation rookies taking several seasons. As I said, it takes 2 to 3 seasons really to bed yourself and to know if you've got what it takes to drive a Formula One car at the absolute top level. It takes that. And here you're taking someone with very little experience of a lesser series and chucking them not just into Formula One, because like Williams, Sauber, whatever, you can go putt around at the back a little bit while you figure your stuff out. That's fine. But you're putting them in a massive spotlight, and that risks a whole different kind of mental damage that we've seen people absolutely destroyed by.
And throw on top of that as well the systems involved in a Formula One car. I mean, Formula 2 cars are like pedal carts in comparison to Formula One machinery in terms of their complexity, right? It's so much to get on top of, and I think again it contextualizes Behrman's appearance in Saudi Arabia even more. And again, the reason that Behrman is being, touted as the next big thing by Ferrari, in his first year in F2 last year, he won more races than anyone else. And what you got to remember as well is that in F2 this year, it's a brand new car. And so having that experience in F2 doesn't really necessarily mean the same thing it would have done in previous seasons, and it means that not necessarily the teams we're used to seeing at the top of the championship are always there as well. Like Prema is one of the best racing teams in the world, full stop, and they've had a difficult start to this year, can't deny it. He's also been very unlucky, and not to mention as well that he missed the whole Saudi Arabian round, a race he was supposed to start on pole position for as well. And so, you can look on the surface and say, yeah, these guys are, 9th and 12th or whatever they are in the championship. Why are they being touted for Formula One while Paul Aaron or, Zane Maloney aren't? And it's because there's so much more to look on it than just where they are in the championship. There's so much context you have to understand. And if you're one of those guys in the top drivers in the championship and you aren't part of a junior program, then even if you do something special, there's still no guarantee you'll be in Formula One. Look at Felipe Drugovich. He had a fantastic year in F2 and didn't get close to a seat.
It may surprise you to know this, Chris, but Spanners and I went to a NASCAR race.
NASCAR.
What? Did you guys never brought it up?
I know. We barely talked about it. But one of the interesting things I learned while I was there was they announced a new driver for Nashville. And I was told that it's actually not the Xfinity Series, which is the F2 equivalent in NASCAR, but the Truck Series that is now closer to the Cup Series car in terms of the way the aerodynamics work and stuff like that. So teams are starting to troll the Truck Series directly for talent and skipping the Xfinity thing. Now, that's a problem for a series to solve. But I bring it up because if I look back at the rookies who had a chance to drive single races, the person who impressed me most was Liam Lawson, and he did not come directly from Formula 2. He came from Super Formula. And I'm wondering if this is a larger issue, a series issue for F1 to solve, that the F2 cars aren't simply representative enough for the teams to get a good idea of how their drivers will do when they step up to the top series.
Yeah, and of course, Verstappen famously skipped Formula 2 as well. And when Red Bull were looking, they went to Formula E in the end for De Vries. So it's got to be a little disheartening for juniors entering F2 going, I'm going to make my mark here. This is my path to F1. Because there's now just a litter bin full of F2 champions who are fancied and, are unable to make the step up.
Yeah. So the whole point of this new F2 car that was introduced this year was to be more like the current generation of Formula One cars. And then, of course, this year we announced the new set of regulations that will take Formula One in a completely different direction. So part of the issue is it's a constant moving goalpost, which doesn't help at all when you think about it. Like the British, you can't call it British F3, sorry, the GB3 series here in the UK. They just announced a new car, and they're like, oh yeah, it's got DRS on it. And, well, Formula One's doing away with DRS, and frankly, I don't like it being in junior series because I think it teaches drivers to rely on DRS rather than hone in inherent racing ability. But that's a different topic for a different day. To the second part of the question, will drivers skip F2? As long as the super license points system is in place, no, because 95% of drivers will need to go through F2 to get the sufficient points for their super license. But what we are finding is it is really, really restricting the number of drivers that teams can choose from to have in their cars. I think it's part of the problem. I think it's part of why we're seeing drivers spend so much longer in F1 and a lot of them overstaying their welcome, if you did away with the point system, you could happily pick up a guy in Formula 3 right now if you wanted to and just plug him straight into the Formula 1 car, which I think a lot of teams would try and do that. But it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, this guy had to go through Formula 2, so therefore he's rubbish. Lewis Hamilton won the GP2 title. Nico Rosberg won the GP2 title. Nico Hulkenberg won the GP2 title. You know, it's not necessarily, oh, you're only good enough for Formula 1 if you are able to skip series. Every driver's got a different story.
You would have to have some kind of super license, because if I won Euro Millions, 140 million euro, I would probably try and buy a season of F1.
But then it's more on meritocracy, because the teams will want to pick you because you're clearly good enough that we can just plug you straight in the car right now.
Clearly good enough. They've seen my iRacing, Chris. That's what it is.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But we're in a Formula One series where experience matters more than any amount of raw talent you have. And I think this is the other problem the teams are coming up against. That's my opinion.
All right, let's roll through some of these mailbag questions in a little bit of a quicker time, because obviously we don't want to exceed our 1 hour time limit. We've done 10 years we've managed to get through without ever going over a metric hour. So Rob asks, has Lando got better this season, or has Piastri just got worse?
That's a really interesting question.
Well, we have to, you know, is the premise correct? Have we seen the gap widen between Norris and Piastri?
Oh, Matt's shaking his head.
That's my perception.
My perception is the car is better.
Yeah.
And the advantage that Lando has with his experience is simply making itself apparent. I think Piastri's actually improved over last season, but the car offers Lando more ceiling right now. And that's why we're perceiving a larger gap there.
No, you're the tyre guy. Has Pirelli been less conservative this year with their tyre choices?
Has Pirelli been less conservative?
Yeah, have they gone like
tire choices?
softer? Have they gone a step softer at some tracks? I think they have. And I'm wondering
maybe at like one track. But remember, they're working on a new softer compound for next season, what they're going to call the C6.
Okay.
Are we doing this again with the hyper, ultra, super duper soft again?
No.
So I think you get what I'm driving at. Like the clear difference between Piastri and Lando Norris is managing tyres through a stint.
Oh, yeah. And this is why this reflects neatly off my experience comment that I was just making. Learning how to manage these tires is the everything. And if you're brand new to the sport and you're brand new to cars with this much power and this much adjustability, it just takes a while to get on top of it, even if you're like super duper amazingly talented, as everyone agreed Piastri is.
I would also think that Lando is I do think he is getting better in a sense. I think he's almost achieving final form, where he's
cusp. He's on the cusp. On the brink. I love it.
He is right on the cusp, isn't he? And I don't think it discredits Oscar in any way that Lando has been performing the way that he has. And I think, if anything, Oscar can learn a lot from Lando.
He certainly doesn't seem to be under any pressure in the team or really in the media. I think you're right that people are just accepting that this is Lando Norris with, you know, the bit between his teeth now, smelling blood in the water, just going for it, and no one is taking that against Piastri. But I would imagine now for the rest of the season, if there's a situation where they need to swap, they'll just get that done. And Piastri, to be fair, has the few situations where it's come up, Piastri has been like, no argument, just been like, yep, off, on you go. And I think that speaks to people in his ear at the team saying to him, hey, whatever happens out there, you know, we think you're going in the right direction. Everything's grand, you know, move with the flow, move with the tide.
But it's also, I mean, it is just basic driver 101. Every fight costs you time. And the least amount of time you can get to the finish in is the best you can possibly do in a race. So if my teammate is there and I know that, I might be faster for a lap or two, but more inconsistent and my tires will go more quickly, then what the only advantage I have is choosing the moment to let him by so I lose as little time as possible. And he understands this is not yet a fight for him. on most tracks. On a low degradation track, we might actually see that change. But like in Barcelona, he understands from the off that he's on a different trajectory, and the team has telemetry and expectations for him. If he wasn't meeting them, I'm sure we'd be hearing about it by now.
Okay, so I think the answer for me is, yeah, Norris is getting better and is performing more consistently. And I think the consistency is what makes drivers like Max Verstappen ferocious, Lewis Hamilton in his championship winning years ferocious, because there's no let up, even in weekends where, yes, the teams might have come up to, a Red Bullish pace on a weekend, because Red Bull and Verstappen are really putting less foots wrong. As soon as people start to make a mistake, if it's early on in the weekend, early on in the race, even with setup or strategy, then they start to fall behind. And so I think even when there's been equal machinery, Verstappen and Red Bull can still make it look like they've got the best car. And that may well be what happened in the Spanish Grand Prix. I'm just saying there wasn't enough data to conclusively say one way or the other. Sujeth says, do you see any other tracks where Red Bull might drop in pace, particularly like Monaco? And then I'll add, like Singapore. Matt, can we predict any other tracks where we think Red Bull are like, that is not going to be a Red Bull track?
Any track that has short, sharp turns will not be their friend. Any track that is very bumpy or has particularly unsettling curbs will not be their friend. And I don't have a complete list of those tracks. I was going to mention Singapore is the very obvious one because they've already struggled there. But I'm sure there's a couple more like that by the time we get to the end of the season.
So Austria has big tracks on the exits, but you don't necessarily run into them anyway. They don't have to run those curbs in Austria.
Not necessarily, no.
So not Austria.
The main concerning curbs are, oddly enough, it's those big flat ones that they use at the last two corners, because it's the vibrations, it's the frequency of the vibrations that causes problems, rather than it being like a big aggressive and riding over these things as like a suspension issue. Because I think the main issue with the car is its sort of compliancy, right? And getting back to that stable platform after coming down from a big curb.
Right, so you hit the curb and then suddenly your aero's in a completely unexpected place. So you accept that as the price of the slightly shorter or more optimal route of going over the curb. But then when you land the other side, Red Bull are what? They then can't get back to the stable platform.
That's my understanding of it in a very simple way of explaining. Well, I think somebody explained it to me. I was like, you need to talk to me like I'm 5, okay, and explain this to me. But that's my very basic comprehension of the issue. Yes.
Okay, here's a fun one. Patrick asks, a bit of a conspiracy theory lookout. Who's behind the recent Mercedes WhatsApp/email leak? Is there anything to it? Seeing Hamilton finally getting a good position in Q3, and when all those emails came out where someone was saying they're sabotaging Lewis Hamilton, and you go, well, okay, sabotage is always a big word. What is it? Never put down to malice. What could be put down to incompetence or error? But I'm sort of fairly satisfied that there's been something happening with tyre temperatures in qualifying, and they seem to have got on top of that. So I don't think it's a coincidence that then he was able to put together a good Q3 in Spain, having very publicly addressed those issues. But from a conspiracy point of view, the funniest thing that could happen is he really struggles in Q3 all season. That email gets leaked to everybody, and then suddenly the next race, the problem's solved, as if to hastily cover up the truth that has been revealed. But if it had continued, that would also have been proof of the conspiracy, because see, they are doing it. See, it's continued.
Isn't that more, instead of suiting your theory to fit facts, changing the facts to suit theory?
Yeah, I mean, you'll never be a good conspiracy theorist without that. So,
yeah, I mean, I haven't got my tinfoil hat on, so I might actually get a critical thought in my head. But I think what's great for why we're seeing better Mercedes pace is that because for this year's car, they finally solved the porpoising issue that plagued them for 2 years. And so they've got a stable platform. They go, oh, look, here are the main problems with our car that we need to address. And because before they were chucking upgrades at it and they weren't working because they weren't performing on track as they were in the simulator, because suddenly the porpoising comes up again and the driver's saying, I can't utilize this, it doesn't work properly. So now they do have a stable platform. They can actually build from this. And so, there were a few false dawns last year where I think even in Barcelona last year, Mercedes got a decent result. And we think, look, they're back. And then the next race, neither car makes it into Q3. Whereas this seems to be more of a genuine improvement.
Yeah, well, I think we'll definitely get a better, scale of the running order and where Mercedes fit into that if Lewis Hamilton is performing at his peak, is qualifying well, and is able to show his race pace. I think when Hamilton was having dodgy Q3s, we actually weren't seeing the full performance of the Mercedes and what it could do. Canada's the best example of that. He was hidden a little bit in the points, but his pace was incredible.
But the tyre thing is just so bizarre in qualifying. It's like the number one thing that every team is looking at this year is how do we get this tyre into this teeny little operating window that is good for qualifying. And frankly, I'm bored of it.
But that's always been, since forever, the chase of the teams. The tires. It always has been. You just haven't been made aware of it.
The tires that work properly are significantly easier to get on top of.
The tires do work because the cars stick to the road, Chris. That's what I'm going to tell you. Doesn't matter what era of tire you go back to. Getting there is a window for every tire. There has always been a window for every tire. And until the end of time or tires, there will continue to be a window in which they are absolutely at their peak. And the goal of the team is always to put the driver there for their qualifying lap so they can set the fastest time.
Chris, you have to understand, Matt is now of the 'twas ever thus age. So now, whatever you tell him, he's seen it all before. It's all cyclical, and he used to wear that as a kid, and it was considered the coolest thing ever.
It's just basic physics and how tires work. I appreciate that you were less aware of it and enjoyed being less aware of it. I can value that as a
You're really going to tell
statement.
me that the Michelins and the Bridgestones have the same operating window as the current Pirellis?
No, I never told you that.
So there's nuances
But
there.
the Michelin itself has an operating window in which it is clearly at its best. And if you bother to pay enough attention to endurance racing, you will see teams struggling to do exactly the same thing that Formula One teams do. It's just less present on camera.
He commentates on endurance racing.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Go ask them. Go ask them if they bother with the window of their tires.
Yeah, what I'm saying is the one on the Pirelli is ridiculously narrow. And that's why you see a team go from being fastest in Q2 to suddenly being 10th in Q3.
It's narrow because all the margins at Formula One are narrower and they engineer it more exactly. But I guarantee you every tire has a sweet spot. And if you hit it,
I know they do. Of course
performance.
they do. But it shouldn't be this narrow. It shouldn't be this difficult.
I'm calling it. We're all still friends. So
I'm deleting him off Instagram.
One reason I think that people should get into either sim racing or go karting, because you will see these effects and you will see the difference between having cold tires and in fact, tires in the correct window, because you can get kart tires that overheat as well and you lose grip as you go into a session. And in fact, I had this one brilliant one at Ella Park where Kyle noticed on our practice laps, he said, these tires overheat after a couple of laps. And so on the lap to the grid, because Kyle had said that, do you know that meme of Kimi Räikkönen driving in a straight line where all the other cars are like fully warming up around him and Kimi Räikkönen's just in a straight line? That was me. And I was slowing down so gradually and really taking care around the corners. And in the first 2 laps, I was skinning people because I had the cold tire grip, whereas theirs was starting to overheat. But, the Formula 3 that we do a lot in iRacing, you can get that sensation of it's really understeering and it's not biting, and then suddenly you feel the temps come in. So I think it's worth doing those things so you can really appreciate what's going on in F1 where they say the tyres are out of temp. It really changes the whole car.
So what you want when you go karting is you want to get in a kart that has just come back from a session rather than
Normally,
the ones
yeah.
at the front of the queue that have been sat there idle for half an hour, because that is a cold car.
Yeah. So this was a rare exception that those tires were losing grip as they heated up. More normally, the cold rental car tire is like driving on ice, and then you'll feel it after 3 or 4 laps. It will just suddenly come in and you'll go, oh, yeah, I've got this, a ton of grip. But it's worth experiencing that. So, we get the Singapore 2018 pole lap from Lewis Hamilton. I think that was a similar sensation where he literally crawled around his outlap and then had a ton of grip and just blew the entire grid away. But you can't do that now because there's minimum lap times, isn't there? So you can't crawl around your outlap anymore.
Well, you can. Yeah, there are minimum or maximum lap times and sector times you have to stay under. But for all intents and purposes, they're low enough that you can generally prep your tires. In fact, saw a divergence in tire prep strategy. Some people were going for 2, some people were going for 1. Was it Monaco or maybe Canada? Like different teams will try different things, but also the heating and cooling cycles in the tire blankets. And this is where Lewis's tire problem is coming from. It was the tire blankets themselves were not adequately preparing the tire. And I think that was something he caught into, and they figured out why that was happening. But yeah, no, they spent some serious engineering time on heating and cooling cycles in the tire blankets to have them ready to go for the race.
Those maximum lap times as well, I think you can just go through them and you get investigated, but nothing ever really comes of it, does it? Has anyone actually been penalized for exceeding the maximum lap time or sector time?
No, because it's always a case of they were slowing down or moving over to let somebody else through on a push lap. And once you do that, then they can't really ding you for it.
Because the reason the rule exists is so that we don't get a repeat of Monza 20, whatever it was.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. Saturday.
Yeah, nobody wanted to be the first car. That's literally the
and
reason.
Then didn't half the grid fail to get over the line in time to set up a qualifying time?
No, most of them. I think like 1 or 2 of them got across the line.
Oh, and we saw it again with Vettel and Austria. I remember looking at this. Like he was on he was trying to get around for a push lap, and there was like 10 cars ahead of him, all going 2 miles an hour. And it creates a very dangerous situation when your sector 3 backs up like that near the last turn.
Okay. One last question then, probably aimed at Matt first. Daz asks, what on earth is going on with Sauber? Audi, worst in the field. Audi seem to be giving themselves a bigger mountain to climb when they take over. So I can't remember what side you fell on this, but my argument was Audi's involvement seemed a little half-baked initially. Then they've taken over 100% of the team now. But as we've seen with Renault, the level of enthusiasm at the very, very top of the company can really affect what happens at the F1 team.
Yeah, so you had a lot of organizational wishy-washy, a lot of changes in the CEO and the people running the project got moved around. So there's a certain amount of instability there. I think the issue is Audi's fundamental plan, and this may have been how they sold it in the first place, was like, oh, we'll just sort of mothball the team, and so we won't have to invest, more than the purchase price, and we'll spread that out over a couple of years. But the problem is every season you don't invest fully. You fall behind in the tools you need to use to actually make your car fast. They do have an advantage, and they've built similar-ish power units before. But the performance of the race team itself is what would concern me, because if you're spending money like that, your most talented engineers are looking for more competitive teams to go to. So there's going to be a brain drain as well from the race operations side of your team, as well as I said, the tools you use to actually engineer the car properly. So I think it's just underinvestment by the corporate parent. And frankly, maybe I can't even blame them now, because if they do kick the regulations back another year, the whole point of them coming in was to have these new regulations to play with. It's going to be a whole extra car they have to design to make up for the extra season under the old regulations.
Audi does not care how fast this current car goes or how this current team necessarily performs. We're not even in the year yet where you're even allowed to start building your 2026 car, which is what it's all about for Audi. It's all, and primarily as well, it's about the engine for them as well. Yes, they're going to invest in the team a little bit to make sure it runs, well, and the car is good, but primarily it's still a Sauber jobby on the car with a bit of Audi help. So I'm not reading anything into how the team is performing at the moment. When we get into next year, we'll start seeing signs, and when the car actually gets out on track.
Signs or Carlos signs, or like visual signs?
Or maybe both.
Oh, okay, brilliant.
Bit of both.
Guys, thanks for dropping in for a bit of a midweek mailbag and a little bit of breaking news as well. Go and follow Chris at Chris on Racing. Follow Matt at MattPT55. Follow me at Spanners Ready. We had a Patreon pod last week. We'll have one for Silverstone, but we are going to skip it this week for the triple header. And join us on Sunday when we review the Austrian Grand Prix at 8 p.m. UK time with Chris, Stuffy and Christian Pedersen. So join us then. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. Matt and Chris are still friends. I promise. They're glowering at each other. Ah, sweet summer child, 'twas ever thus.